Welcome in everybody to the fifth video in my 2024 Rookie Prospect Profile series. Today we're taking a look at my Rookie 1.05 in one quarterback leagues and 1.09 in Superflex leagues, and that's LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. Just another really good prospect and a continuation of this fantastic rookie wide receiver class this year. Taking a look at his college career, BTJ joined LSU in 2021 with Malik Nabers and was just in a big mess of a bunch of guys like Booty, Nabers, Trey Palmer, etc. So he only managed 350 yards and 2 touchdowns on 28 receptions as a freshman. And unfortunately, his 2022 sophomore season was more of the same behind Malik Nabers and Kayshon Boutte, hauling in 360 yards and 5 touchdowns on 30 run receptions. So not really much growth going on from year 1 to year 2. However, in 2023, with Kayshon Boutte gone and Janiel Daniels just exploding in production, BTJ recorded almost 1,200 receiving yards and an NCAA leading 17 touchdowns on 68 receptions, averaging over 17 yards per reception and 13.9 average depth of target, which was tied for 10th in the NCAA among receivers with at least 50 receptions. And this is the explosive season that has risen BTJ's draft stock to a potential top 20 overall pick in the NFL draft. So let's get into the analytics, and if you have watched these videos before, you are familiar then with my marker system, which is just simply a series of checkboxes or baselines that I want players to hit based on what previously successful players did coming out of college. And at the wide receiver position, I have 16 markers that are checking for various production and athleticism metrics with a final adjustment at the end based on draft capital. And currently, Brian Thomas is grading out with 9 markers hit, which is tied for second in this class behind Malik Nabers with Rome Odunze. And then when he's most likely drafted in round 1, that'll bring him up to 10 total markers hit, which does put him in the same tier of past first round prospects that I mentioned with Odunze's profile of guys like Treylon Burks, Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., Dez Bryant, Demaryius Thomas, and Roddy White. The only markers that he misses on are first yards per team pass attempt and fantasy points per game, best yards per team pass attempt, and best market share of yards. He had a 20% breakout age, which was after his second season, and then he also misses on BMI. He's at like 26 something. I'm looking for 27, which 5 of those 6 markers are the same markers that Rome Odunze is also missing on. So analytically, from my process, Brian Thomas is grading out as a very good receiver prospect in this class. What concerns me about his profile is the massive leap he took from basically not doing anything in year 1 and year 2 to all of a sudden having a monster year 3 season. It's a very similar issue that I had with Jameson Williams a couple years ago, and then Jalen Hyatt even last year. I mean, what was it that was inhibiting Thomas from growing from year 1 to year 2, and then from year 2 to year 3, like what Malik Nabers did in this exact same offense? Was it Kayshon Boutte? Because that's not really a great sign if it was. Nabers passed Boutte in 2022. Brian Thomas didn't. It wasn't Jaden Daniels. He was there for both years too. It wasn't Brian Kelly. He was the head coach both years too. So was it really Kayshon Boutte that's inhibiting Brian Thomas? That is not good if it is. If you want 2 recent examples of similar situations, let me point you towards Jonathan Mingo last year, who practically did more in his final season statistically than his first 3 seasons combined. He is uber athletic and his value rose significantly to being an early second round pick, but for all intents and purposes, his rookie season was really bad, and he's kind of going the way of a bust in the NFL. And then there's Kadarius Toney, who actually did significantly more in his final season statistically than his first 3 years combined at Florida. He is also uber athletic, and his value rose to the back of the first round in the NFL draft, and his career has 100% been a bust up to this point. I already mentioned Jameson Williams is kind of in this bucket as well after transferring from Ohio State to Alabama, but I'll still say that the jury is out on him still for the most part. And then Jalen Hyatt, who did less than Jonathan Mingo did as a rookie last year, so yeah, that's not really that good. I can even go a little further back too and hit you with 4 other disgusting comparisons for BTJ based on this final season spike. Kevin White fits Brian Thomas Jr. both analytically because of that spike at West Virginia, and then physically, since they're both nearly identical in size and speed. You hate to see when Kevin White pops up on your comparison list. And then a year later, Josh Doctson also had very little production in year 1 and year 2, then had a huge spike in year 3, and then he did end up staying for year 4 and really only marginally improved from his year 3 peak, but was still a first round pick that year and turned into a massive NFL bust. Also in 2016 was Laquan Treadwell, another player who totaled about the same number statistically in year 3 as he did in year 1 and year 2 combined. It was another first-round NFL pick that just ended up being a hardcore bust. And then 1 year later in 2017, John Ross, massive final season after not doing anything in his first 3 years, first round pick in the NFL draft, and major bust at the NFL level. So it's kind of essentially just think back to like some of the biggest bust at the wide receiver position in the last like 8 to 10 years. And Brian Thomas Jr. comps really closely analytically because of essentially just being a 1 year wonder for any given reason. Now, I understand that I just painted a really bad picture for Brian Thomas Jr. as a prospect, but there is hope still because of the type of player that he is. He is a prototypical outside wide receiver at 6'3", 210 pounds, and somehow still clocked in at a 4.33 40-yard dash. That's like Christian Watson's athleticism in frame, but there's another recent NFL bust so far in his career as a comparison to BTJ in some capacity. But Thomas is also a very solid route runner as well too. He's very capable of beating press coverage off the line of scrimmage with a very handy toolkit of release packages. He's also very fluid mechanically as a route runner that then when combined with his short area burst and explosiveness, it's very easy for him to create separation against defensive backs. He also has very excellent ball tracking abilities, which you see all over his highlight film of deep balls from Jaden Daniels, which is really the area where Brian Thomas Jr. excels at the most as a wide receiver. I think one of his biggest weaknesses as a receiver, though, is that he doesn't really utilize his size to his fullest capabilities. Like, he is 6'3", 210 pounds. That is bigger than like 95% of defensive backs against him, but he is not an overpowering threat at the catch point when he has to fight through contact. It's a trait that is very reminiscent to me of Quentin Johnston last year. There it is again, another wide receiver on the path towards being a bust in the NFL. It's just so awkward to see a receiver with such obvious physical gifts in both size and speed just not be able to use them effectively or to their highest potential, which is not to say that he can't get there, but coming out of college, it's really no surprise that he only had 1 year of production because of some of the areas that he lacks in at the position. I do think that Brian Thomas Jr. would operate best in the NFL as more of a team's wide receiver 2 or like a wide receiver 1B, basically like what he did with Malik Nabers at LSU last year. So with that in mind, I think the best landing spots for him in that mid to late first round of the NFL draft this year are the Jacksonville Jaguars as the Calvin Ridley replacement, or perhaps maybe more of like the Zay Jones replacement next year with Christian Kirk in the slot. I get that they just signed Gabe Davis, but I don't think that's what's going to stop them from still putting talent around Trevor Lawrence. Cincinnati is right after the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think they make a ton of sense for Brian Thomas Jr. to play the T. Higgins role. I could see like a draft day trade happen similar to what the Titans did with A.J. Brown. Then they tried to replace him with Treylon Burks. That didn't really work out well, but something very similar where T. Higgins is traded and then replaced by a younger, cheaper version of him. Pittsburgh would work too as he operates across from George Pickens after they just traded away Deontay Johnson. Dallas, I think, makes a ton of sense since they lost Michael Gallup in free agency and Brandon Cooks is turning 31 this year. So to have another young and athletic option across from CeeDee Lamb would open up their offense a lot. And I think would also work very well for fantasy football too, as like the NFC version of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And then lastly, the Buffalo Bills, I think, would also work very well. They lost Gabe Davis in free agency and only brought in Curtis Samuel, which does feel kind of semi-redundant with Khalil Shakir, but Buffalo could work as like a passing of the baton situation where BTJ operates across from Stephon Diggs, then Stephon Diggs moves on, and then Brian Thomas Jr. becomes the wide receiver 1 for Josh Allen, kind of like what Dallas did with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. I think could also work well for BTJ in Buffalo. So if you have the 1.05 in one quarterback or the 109, 110 in Superflex, and you are looking at drafting Brian Thomas Jr., I wouldn't be entirely discouraged by all of the comparisons that I just made to past NFL busts in this video. BTJ can still absolutely succeed just fine in the NFL in the right situation. But what I would like to pass on is that he is not an upper echelon prospect at the wide receiver position. And I do believe that there is a relatively steep drop off from my wide receiver 3, Rome Odunze, to wide receiver 4, Brian Thomas Jr., to a degree where if you are shaky on BTJ's profile and his comparisons in this video, and you just want a better prospect, then trade up for Rome Odunze at the 103 or 1.06, depending on your league format. Make that move now before the NFL draft, before your league mates start attaching names to these picks as we get into April and closer to the NFL draft. that could be a massively beneficial decision for you in the long run if BTJ does somehow end up a bust, and even if Rome Odunze is just like a back-end wide receiver 2, let alone a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, because it's just as important to avoid the landmines in these rookie drafts as it is to hit on the stars in rookie drafts.